The woman who owned the tallest building in Pittsburgh crouched down next to me in a coat that cost more than my truck, and told me that if the glass deck opened that night, she'd make me rich. "Whatever figure you've got in your head," she said, "put a 1 in front of it." The crack I was looking at when she said it was maybe 1.5 inches long. You could have hidden it under a nickel. In the beam of my flashlight it looked like nothing. A hairline of brighter silver running sideways across the top lug of the right outrigger pin, right where the steel disappeared into the embed plate sunk in the concrete core. I had the access panel half off and one knee on a moving blanket and a Sharpie behind my ear, and I already knew exactly what I was looking at before I got the cover all the way clear. I knew it because I'd lost a year of sleep over that exact connection 9 years earlier, in a glass conference room 2 states east, arguing with men who had already decided they weren't going to hear me. Nobody up on that observation floor knew that yet. As far as they were concerned, I was the night special inspector somebody had dragged off his couch on a Tuesday. I took the flashlight out from between my teeth, looked at that thin, bright line one more time, exactly where I'd told a room full of people it would someday show up, and I looked at her. "Get everybody off the deck," I said. "Nobody's going out on that glass tonight." She didn't move for a second. I could see her doing the arithmetic, deciding whether I was a problem she could manage or an idiot she could roll right over. By morning, 11 people were going to understand why a crack the length of a paperclip was worth more than her whole building. And by morning, every one of them was also going to learn the thing about myself I'd kept locked in my chest for 6 years in that city without telling a soul. But the crack isn't really where it starts. It starts 9 years before, with a decision I made and the bill I paid for it. My name's Adrian Costa. I'm 43. These days I weld and I inspect, mostly inspect. I'm a journeyman ironworker out of the local, and I'm also a certified welding inspector and a registered special inspector, which is the credential that lets me put my name on a report that says a structure was built the way the drawing said and it's safe to load. When I sign that, I own it. If something I cleared comes down later, the lawyers and the city come looking for my signature before they look at anybody else's. That's what I am now. It isn't what I was. I'll get to that. Let me tell you about my kid first, because he's the only reason any of the rest of it means anything. Theo's 10. He lives with me, full stop, all week, every week. His mom, Renata, and I split about 5 years back. There's no big, ugly story in it. We just wore each other down to nothing and finally admitted it. She's in Phoenix now, with a guy named Greg who sells medical software, and Theo flies out there a couple weeks in the summer and at Christmas, and the rest of the year it's the two of us in a narrow row house in Carrick, with a mortgage I think about more than a grown man should. The night this all happened started ordinary. I picked Theo up from the after-school program at 5:30, and on the drive home he told me, in that flat, serious voice he uses when something's gone wrong in his world, that his bridge wasn't going to make it. Science fair. He'd built a little truss bridge out of basswood sticks and wood glue, and it kept caving when he hung the weights on it. "Where's it giving out?" I asked him. "Right in the middle. It just sags and then it snaps." "Then the middle's not your problem," I said. "The middle's just where you can watch it happen. Your problem's down at the ends, where the bridge sits on the supports. That's where everything you hang in the middle actually ends up. Don't stare at the part that's bending. Look at the part that's holding it still." He went quiet, chewing on that. We had spaghetti out of a jar because it was a Tuesday and I'm not a chef. He took his bridge apart and started re-gluing the end joints at the kitchen table while I did the dishes. Around 7, Inez from 2 doors down came over. She's retired off the post office and she sits with him when I get called in, and my phone went off. It was Gus Riley, the night foreman on the Allegheny Crossing job downtown, and he sounded like a man standing a little too close to a grease fire. "Adrian, I need you on site tonight. Tonight, like now. We got the Voss thing, the big opening up on 47, and the lady herself is down here riding everybody. The day inspector cleared the deck this afternoon, but the monitoring outfit flagged something on the right, outrigger, and Bryce is telling everybody it's a bad sensor. And Adrian, just come look. Please." "Which deck?" I said, though I already had a bad feeling. "The cantilever, the glass overlook, the Voss Group's whole show." I didn't say anything for a beat. Gus didn't know what he'd just handed me. To him it was a fancy box of glass hanging off a tower. To me it was 9 years of my life with the lights off. "I'm on my way," I said. I kissed the top of Theo's head, told him bed by 9, no arguments, and I drove downtown with my hands tighter on the wheel than the drive called for. Here's what I walked into. Allegheny Crossing is a glass tower on the river, 51 stories, and it was supposed to be the building that put Margot Vandersloot on the map for good. She'd built it. Well, her company built it, Vandersloot Group, and the thing she'd staked the whole reputation on was a feature near the top, a cantilever glass observation box that juts out 18 feet past the face of the building on the 47th floor, a clear glass floor, glass walls. So you walk out and there's nothing but the city and the river's 400-some feet straight down under your shoes. She called it the perch. It was the photo on every rendering, every billboard, every brochure. It was the building. And that night was the unveiling. Margot had a refinancing deal hanging by a thread. The construction loan was coming due, and she had a group of investors in a private dining room up on 48, and the whole package depended on them being impressed. The plan was champagne at 11. The lights of the city below, the investors and a couple of city dignitaries walking out onto the glass for the first time, a photographer, the works, close the round, refinance, the company lives, miss it, spook the money, and it all walks. I got most of that in about 90 seconds because everyone on that floor told me at once, talking over each other. The first one to reach me was the GC's project executive, a tall, smooth guy with a good haircut and an expensive vest, name of Bryce Holloway. He met me at the elevator before I'd even gotten my badge clipped. "You, the second opinion," he said, and the way he said it told me everything about what he thought of second opinions. "Listen, the deck's fine. We had a strain channel on the right outrigger. Throw a flag during the load proof this afternoon. It's reading noise. It's almost certainly a flaky gauge. The day inspector signed off. The EOR's comfortable. Ops just wanted another set of eyes before we let people walk out there, which, great, due diligence. But we are pouring champagne at 11, so whatever you're going to look at, look fast." "A strain flag," I said, "on the right outrigger. Which cord?" He blinked. "Most guys don't ask me that." "Top cord. Tension side." "How'd you know that?" "Lucky guess," I said. Which was the first lie I told that night, because a tension reading climbing on that cord on a connection like the one I knew was hidden behind that wall meant the load was finding a new path, and there's exactly one reason load goes looking for a new path. The path it's supposed to take has started to let go. I'd run the numbers on that connection myself, a long time ago. I just didn't say so. The young guy who'd actually done the inspection found me by the access wall a minute later. 24, sharp eyes, already braced for a fight before I'd said a word. Andre Pulaski. He told me he checked the outrigger connections, that everything keyed out to the drawings, that the strain channel was acting up and the rest were nominal. I didn't argue with him. I never argue at that stage. The steel doesn't take sides. I just asked him for a flashlight and the panel key, and I went to the wall. I didn't go to the bolted splice he'd opened and photographed. I went 2 feet over, to a removable cover nobody opens on a routine walk, because the inspection checklist doesn't tell you to. I knew to open it because, a long time ago, I'd been in the rooms where we decided what would and wouldn't go on that checklist, and I'd lost the argument about this exact spot. That's where I was, getting the last fastener loose with my knuckles scraped raw, when Margot Vandersloot came across the floor in heels that probably cost my monthly mortgage and offered to make me a rich man. And I told her to clear the deck. For a second she just looked at me. Then very level she said, "Mr. Costa, I'm going to need you to explain that to me." Slowly. "I have 4 people in the room down the hall who are about to sign paper that keeps 300 people on payroll, and they would like to drink champagne on my glass in about 2 hours. I slid the cover free and folded it down out of the way, and I handed her my flashlight and put her hand on the beam and aimed it. That right there is the upper pin lug for the right outrigger truss. The deck doesn't just stick out of the building. It's held by 2 big steel trusses, and each truss is pinned into a steel assembly buried in the concrete core, top and bottom. That's the top one. The top pin takes the tension, the pull, when there's weight out on the end of the deck and wind working it. That bright line running across the lug is a crack." "It's a scratch," Bryce said over my shoulder. "It isn't. A scratch sits on top and only catches your fingernail one direction. That catches both ways, going and coming. That's not on the surface. That's the surface opening up." I looked at Margot, and it's a fatigue crack, which means the metal's been working itself apart in that spot a little at a time, for a long time. It didn't show up today. It's been growing for years. Today's just the day somebody finally looked in the right place. Bryce made a noise through his nose. There are acceptance criteria. There are tolerances for surface indications in the spec. Not for a crack running through the load path of a primary pin lug there aren't, I said. Corrosion pitting, a gouge, a little distortion maybe. A crack across the lug through the part that's actually holding the weight is a hard stop and you know it. He did know it. I watched him know it, and I watched him decide he'd rather not. That's the part people who've never stood in one of those rooms don't get. It's not that nobody else could see it. It's that seeing it had become inconvenient for everybody, and so a whole crowd of smart, experienced people had quietly agreed not to look there. I knew that feeling from the inside. I'd watched a whole company do it once. Margot straightened up. The smooth calm had a hairline of its own in it now. Then we find another inspector. Somebody who'll sign it. You could, I said, but that's not how that works anymore. Mr. Costa, you've been in this building for 15 minutes. And there it was, the thing that turned the night, because I was tired and my knees hurt and I was kneeling under a piece of steel I'd helped design, looking at the exact failure I'd predicted out loud 9 years before, and getting told I'd been there 15 minutes. I've been here 15 minutes, I said, but I've known about this connection for 9 years. The floor went quiet. Even HVAC seemed to hush. What does that mean? Margot said. It means I want you to do one thing before you fire me, I said. Call the engineer of record, not the office line, the after-hours line, the principal. Tell them you've got a suspected fatigue crack on the upper pin lug of the right deck outrigger, and read them the connection mark number off the steel. It's stamped right here. And while you've got them, tell them to pull the original connection calc and the fatigue check, and ask them whose name is on the descent letter in the design record. Whose name is on it? I didn't answer that. Not yet. Some things you have to earn the right to say out loud, even when they're about you. Just make the call, I said. She studied me a long time, and then this was the first thing that made me think there was more to Margot Vandersloot than the code. She didn't fire me. She took out her phone. It's 9:40 at night, Bryce said. It's the after-hours line for the engineer of record on a high-rise, I said. Somebody's always on it. That's the whole point of it. While she dialed, I did the thing that I think actually mattered more than anything else I did that night, the thing they train you to do and you pray you never have to. I went to the inspection log on the table, the bound one with the numbered pages, and in my own hand, with the date and the time, 9:48 p.m., I wrote up a discrepancy. Suspected fatigue crack, right deck outrigger upper pin lug, through the load path. Observation deck removed from service pending non-destructive testing. Occupancy withheld, and I signed it with my certification number under it. The second that entry existed, that deck was closed until somebody qualified signed it back open. Margot Vandersloot could fire every inspector in Allegheny County. She could not make that glass safe to stand on with a phone call. I'd just nailed it shut with a pen. Andre had gone the color of putty. Did I miss that? It's under a cover the checklist doesn't send you to, I said. It's a hard catch. But the kid deserved the real lesson, not the soft version. The strain flag wasn't nothing, though. That was the steel telling you the load was leaving the path it's supposed to take, and there's only one path it can leave. You saw the symptom. You just didn't follow it back to the cause. Next time something flags, don't ask whether it's inside the tolerance. Ask what would have to be true for the building to be saying this. That question walks you right to this lug. He nodded slow. He was going to be okay. The ones who feel sick about almost missing something always are. It's the ones who shrug it off that keep me up at night. Across the floor, Margot had been talking low into the phone, then less low, and then she'd gone quiet and just listened for a long stretch. When she finally lowered the phone, she came back across to me, and she was looking at me different, not warm, careful. The way you look at something you just found out isn't what the label said. They're sending people, she said, tonight. A senior engineer and a testing crew from the structural firm and the steel fabricator both. The man on the phone went very quiet, very fast when I read him that mark number. She paused. And then he asked me how I'd known to look at that specific lug. I told him my night inspector flagged it. He asked your name. I gave it to him. She paused again. And he stopped talking for a second, and then he said, I'm quoting him, "If Adrian Costa is the one who found it, then it's real, and you ought to thank God he was in your building tonight." Bryce Holloway looked at me like he was seeing a different person than the one who'd walked off the elevator. "Who are you?" Margot said. So I told her. Standing under the deck of a building I'd helped engineer at 10 o'clock at night, I finally told somebody the whole thing. I didn't start as an iron worker. I started as one, got into the local at 19, ran beams and bolted up steel because I loved that a structure tells you the plain truth if you know how to read it. Then I put myself through a civil engineering degree at night, 4.5 brutal years, and I went and sat behind a desk. Structural connections. 9 years ago, I was a connection design engineer at the firm that detailed the deck support system for this whole product line, these big cantilevered glass overlooks that developers were putting on towers all over the country because they photographed like $1 million. This building. This family of buildings. The one I was lying under in the dark. "You designed this," Margot said. "I didn't design the building. Thousands of people design a building. I worked on one piece of it, the connection that holds the deck on. And when we ran the fatigue check on those upper pin lugs, I didn't like what came back." This was the part I'd never told a single person in Pittsburgh. Not Gus, not the guys I bolted up steel with every day. They thought I was an iron worker with a chip on his shoulder and a good eye. None of them knew about the conference room. "The lug passed," I said. "On paper, barely. The fatigue numbers said it would last the design life under the loads we expected it to see. But I kept finding cases. A tall building like this sheds wind off its corners in a rhythm, and that rhythm can shake a cantilever. And if you stack the wind oscillation on top of a full crowd standing out on the end of the deck for a long event, the stress range at that lug crept up into the range where it could start a crack early. Not fail tomorrow early, crack years before anybody be looking, and our inspection interval was too long and pointed at the wrong spot to ever catch it in time. I wanted one of two things: a beefier lug, a redesign, more margin. Or, if not that, a mandatory recurring ultrasonic check right at that lug, on a short interval, with a line on the checklist telling the inspector to pull this exact cover and shoot it. It would have cost money. It would have slid the fabrication schedule. There were people whose year-end depended on that schedule. "And they said no," Margot said. "They said it passed. I was inside the tolerance. So I was, in their words, not seeing the bigger picture. I was the guy who couldn't sign off on a win. I looked back up at the lug, at the silver line catching the work light. So I wrote a letter, a formal dissent. You have the right to do that, and honestly the duty if you believe something isn't safe. You put it in the design record. I laid out the failure mode. Fatigue cracking at the upper pin lug. I said the inspection interval wouldn't find it before it mattered. I signed it and I dated it and I filed it. And then eventually I left, not in a blaze of glory. They just made the work small and the days long, until there was no reason left to stay, and one morning I cleaned out my desk and went back to the one thing I'd always trusted, which was steel and a hood, and my own name on my own work. And for 6 years, I said, I told myself maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe I really was just the difficult guy who couldn't let it go. And then tonight Gus says the word overlook on the phone, and I drive down here, and I open a cover nobody opens, and there it is, right where I said it'd be, exactly the way I said it happened. Nobody said anything for a while. Somewhere out past the glass, the city kept on glittering like nothing was wrong because it didn't know yet. "You could have told me who you were the second I doubted you," Margot said, "instead of letting me stand here threatening to fire you. If I'd opened with, I designed this, trust me, I'd have just been one more guy with a story," I said. "The log entry doesn't care who I used to be. The test that's coming doesn't care. That crack is true whether I'm a genius or a crank. I'd rather let the steel do the talking. It always has for me." She looked at me a long moment. "My father worked steel," she said quietly. And then she didn't explain it, and I didn't ask. What none of us knew yet, what I didn't find out for another 2 hours, was that there was something else buried in this thing, and it was worse than the crack. The crew came up a little after midnight. The senior man from the structural firm was a calm, gray-bearded engineer named Desmond Achebe, and he came off the elevator, found me across the floor, and stopped dead. "Costa," he said, "I read your letter." He walked over and shook my hand like it weighed something. When I took over peer review on this fleet of buildings 4 years ago, I read that whole design file front to back, and yours was the one page in it I couldn't stop thinking about. I went to bat to shorten that interval. 2 years ago, I got the same answer you did. His techs got to work. While they set up, Achebe pulled up the building's history on his tablet, and he told us the thing that turned my stomach. "This isn't the first tower we built with this detail," he said, "but this is one of the early ones, and it's got a record." He scrolled. "About 3 years ago, this deck had an event. There was a private function up here before the building even formally opened, somebody's idea of a soft launch, and the occupancy out on the deck went way past the rated number for the better part of an hour. Way past, and it happened during a windstorm that had the whole tower moving. Crowd load in the building working at the same time, for an hour." He looked up. "It was inspected afterward and cleared, but the inspection they ran was the standard one. The interval that's in the manual. The one that does not send anybody to pull this cover and shoot this lug." I felt the floor tip a couple degrees. "So this lug already took the worst hour of its life," I said. 3 years ago. The exact load case I flagged, and then it went right back into service, and nobody ever looked here. Because the checklist I tried to change never told anybody to." "That's right," Achebe said quietly. "Your failure mode. Your interval. Your lug." He set the tablet down. "Let's prove it. And then let's make sure it never gets the chance to happen on another one of these." They ran a dye-penetrant test first. If you've never seen one, they clean the steel, spray on a fluorescent dye that seeps into any opening too fine to see, wipe the surface clean, then hit it with a developer that draws the dye back out of wherever it's hiding. Under a black light, a real crack lights up like a thread of cold fire, and there's no arguing with it. It turns, "I think I see something," into, "There it is," and takes the opinion right out of it. They killed the work lights and Achebe put the lamp on the lug. That 1.5 inches I'd found glowed up bright and went on glowing past where I'd been able to see it under white light, curving down into the body of the lug, into steel you couldn't lay eyes on at all. Then they ran an ultrasonic probe across it, the tool that listens to how deep a flaw runs by how it bounces sound back, and the tech watched his screen and went very still. He looked at Achebe and turned the screen so he could see it. "This is well past the surface," Achebe said. "It's into the body of the lug, more than halfway through." He looked at me, then at Margot, and he picked his words, careful. "Ma'am, this connection was not going to survive a full crowd out on that deck, with the building moving in any real wind. Maybe not tonight. If you'd had a dozen people standing out on the end of that glass for an hour and a gust front came up the river the way they do." He didn't finish it the gentle way. "The top of that truss lets go. The deck drops on the pin at the bottom and rotates, and the glass goes with it. At that height, full of people, that's not an evacuation. That isn't survivable." The floor was dead silent. 4 investors, 2 dignitaries, a photographer, a couple of Margot's people who'd planned to be out there hosting. 12 souls on a deck that was supposed to fill up around 11, more than an hour gone, in the version of the night that didn't happen. Margot was staring at the glowing line like it was a photo of something terrible that hadn't gotten to occur, and I understood she was running the same names I would have been running, except every single one was somebody she'd invited up here herself. "I was going to be standing out there," she said, "not to me, to the lug. I was going to be at the rail watching their faces when they looked down." She didn't cry. She wasn't built that way. But something went out of her face, and something else came into it, and when she finally turned to me, her voice had lost every ounce of the steel it had had 2 hours before. "I offered you money to ignore that," she said. "You did. I stood right here and told you I'd make you rich if you'd let me put people on it. You did." She nodded slow. "And 9 years ago you tried to stop this before the first one was ever built, and a company picked a schedule over you and it cost you everything." "It did. And you came back and worked underneath the buildings you used to design, and you never told a soul." "The steel doesn't care about my resume," I said. "Turns out a crack doesn't either. Here's the part that's bigger than that one night, and it's the part I'm actually proud of. Because of what was in that log, and because of a letter a younger, angrier version of me had filed in a drawer 9 years before, the firm and the fabricator couldn't write this off as one building's bad luck. If this lug had cracked from a known failure mode, at a known weak spot, on an early unit, then every one of those decks out there was a suspect. Achebe's crew that night became the first data point in something a lot bigger. Inside 3 weeks, the firm issued a bulletin telling every owner of one of those decks to run a one-time ultrasonic inspection on that upper pin lug, with a short recurring interval after basically the interval I'd asked for 9 years before. And because a finding like that on something the public stands on isn't optional, the local building authorities and then a national advisory followed, making it mandatory. They found cracks on 2 other towers, both early units, both with some abnormal loading in their history, both open to the public, both with people walking out on the glass that very week. I think about those 2 buildings more than I think about ours, honestly. Ours had me flat on my back under it at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday by dumb luck. Those 2 had nobody. The only thing between them and the worst headline you can imagine was a paragraph in a bulletin that only existed because of an 1.5-inch line in a tower in Pittsburgh, and a letter a kid I used to be had filed away certain it would never matter to anyone. You do the right thing once, quietly, and it costs you your whole career, and you spend 6 years deciding it meant nothing, and then one cold night it reaches all the way out and saves people you'll never meet, in buildings you'll never set foot in. I don't have a clean way to say what that did to me. I just know I'd needed it longer than I'd let myself admit. Now I told you there's no fairy tale in this, and there isn't. Margot didn't hand me a check for $1 million. Real life doesn't do that. What she did was in some ways better. And it took her a few weeks because she did it right instead of doing it for show. The refinancing fell apart, by the way. Of course it did. You can't tell 4 careful men with money that the showpiece of the building had a crack that would have dropped a deck full of people into the river and expect them to feel reassured. The lead investor, a flinty man named Conrad Beale, made a remark about whether the Vandersloot Group was ready for this kind of project and said they'd circle back, which in money language means goodbye. The most important night of Margot Vandersloot's life turned into a smoking hole. A lot of people in that chair bury the inspector who caused it, quietly fix the steel, lose the troublemaker's number, manage the story. Margot called the building department and the engineer of record herself the very next morning before anybody made her and put the whole thing on the record in her own name. That told me who she actually was under the coat. And about 3 weeks later, and I'll get the timing exactly right because it matters to me, she asked me to come up to her office and she offered me a job, not the night inspector slot, a new one she made up. Director of Structural Integrity and Life Safety for the Vandersloot Group, reporting to nobody but the board, independent, out of reach of the people whose job it is to get a building open on time or sell the space. I told her I'd take it under conditions, and we sat there and negotiated them on paper like adults. I told her the real problem in her company had never been a bad inspector. Andrei Pulaski wasn't a bad inspector. The real problem was that for one night the entire survival of her company had been allowed to rest on the one person whose only job was to say no when no was the truth. And then that person got offered a fortune to say yes by the most powerful woman in the building with the project executive, breathing down his neck, and a clock on the wall. I told her the whole value of an inspector's signature is that it can't be bought, and it can't be rushed. And the second it can be either one, it's worth nothing. And so is every building it's ever cleared. So here's what I asked her for, and what she gave me in writing, with the board's names under it. An inspection and life safety authority that reports on its own, never under the people whose job is to make the thing open or sell the seats, real staffing and rest rules so nobody ever again runs a life safety inspection at the tail end of a 16-hour day with everybody staring at the clock. An assigned stop work authority. Any inspector, any iron worker, any welder on a Vandersloot job can shut a thing down for a safety reason and cannot be fired, disciplined, demoted, blacklisted, or leaned on for it, ever, even if they turn out to be wrong, because the day you punish somebody for a no that turned out to be unnecessary is the day everybody on that crew quietly learns to stop saying no. And then one day the no that needed saying never comes, and 12 people walk out onto the glass. She signed all of it. 9 years ago, she said when she set the pen down, a company decided your no was too expensive. I'd like mine to be the one that decided it wasn't. She turned the document around so I could read the top of it. The policy had a name. They'd called it the Costa Standard. It should have your name on it, she said. You paid for it twice. I didn't have anything to say to that. I'd just signed. I got home late the night it all got finalized, almost 3 weeks to the day after the night in the tower. Theo was at the kitchen table and the bridge was gone. The science fair had come and gone with everything else while I wasn't paying attention. "How'd the bridge do?" I asked. He held up a little red ribbon. "Second." "Second? What beat you?" "A baking soda volcano." He rolled his eyes exactly the way his mother used to. "Everybody loves a volcano, but Dad, and he got serious, that careful, all the way through serious he gets. The judge said mine was the only bridge that didn't break when they hung the heavy weights on it. The volcano just looked cool. Mine actually held." I sat down across from him. "You know why it held?" "Because I fixed the ends," he said, "where it sits on the supports, not the part in the middle that you can see bend." "Where the load actually goes," I said, "not the part that's moving." He grinned and went back to whatever he was gluing next. A catapult, I think. God help my kitchen. And I sat there at that table and thought about 1.5 inches of silver on a lug behind a cover nobody's told to open, the one spot where every bit of that load comes home to roost. And I thought about a younger guy in a glass conference room 9 years back, losing an argument and a career, filing a letter into a drawer, dead certain it would never matter to a living soul. It mattered. It just took 9 years and one cold night on the river to find out. I make a decent living now. I'll never be rich. There's a version of that night where I take the money and I'm a wealthy man, and there's no version of that night where I take the money and I get to sit across a kitchen table and explain to my kid why you reinforce the joints nobody can see. I pick the table. I'd pick it again every single time without thinking twice. So let me ask you one thing before you go. I went back to work quietly underneath the very thing that cost me everything, and I waited 6 years without ever once knowing whether being right would ever amount to anything. Here's what I want to know from you. Have you ever been the person in the room who said the hard no, the one nobody wanted to hear? And did it ever come back around the way mine finally did? Or are you still waiting? Tell me down in the comments. I read them, all of them, and I'd really like to know. And if any of this landed on you, if you believe the person who says the difficult no is worth more than the one who says the easy yes, do me a favor and let me know you're out there, because the next story is one I've been holding on to for a long time, and I don't think you're going to want to miss it. The thing I keep coming back to is how small that crack was, 1.5 inches. You could have walked past it 10,000 times, and the only reason I didn't walk past it is that 9 years earlier I'd already paid for the right to recognize it. Nothing in my life happened by accident that night. The strain flag, the cover nobody opens, the letter in a drawer 2 states away. Every one of those was a seed somebody planted long before, and the harvest just happened to come due at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday. That's the part people miss when they only see the lucky ending. There was no luck. There was a younger man who did a hard, costly thing in a quiet room, and a crack that had been growing patiently ever since, and the two of them finally meeting. What saved those people on Margot Vandersloot's deck wasn't talent. Plenty of smart engineers had looked at that connection and signed it. What saved them was that I refused to let what was convenient become what was true. When you can look straight at the thing that pays your mortgage and still call it broken because it is broken, that's not cleverness. That's a spine. I lost a whole career holding on to mine, and for 6 years I wasn't even sure it had been worth it. But a spine alone wouldn't have found that lug. I had to actually know where the load goes, had to have done the math, had to keep asking the question Andrei Pulaski hadn't learned to ask yet. Not is this inside the limit, but what would have to be true for the building to be telling me this? You are not kind of knowing the slow way, one hood and one couse and one wrong answer at a time. Nobody hands it to. And neither of those is worth a thing if you fold. The years I spent underneath the buildings I used to design, certain I'd been the difficult guy who couldn't let go, that's where it almost died. Most quitting doesn't happen in a dramatic moment. It happens quietly, on an ordinary night, when staying right has stopped paying and nobody's watching. I just kept showing up. That's the whole secret, if there is one. I tell Theo all of it now in pieces he can carry. Fix the joint nobody can see. Don't lie about what you find, even to yourself. Even when the truth is expensive. Keep going long after it stops feeling like it matters because you almost never get to know in advance which quiet, unpaid no is the one that ends up holding 12 people in the air. I'll never be rich, but I got to be the man at that kitchen table instead of the man who took the check. And some nights, when I think about those 2 other towers with nobody under them, that feels like the richest thing there is.